All right, everybody. Welcome to another week of the Safely Extreme podcast here on Game Wisdom. This is for the week of June 6, 2021. I'm, of course, Josh Bycer, and joining me, my co host from Nexus Games, Sharky. How are you doing this very hot and summer filled day?
Uh, Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong.
So it's just another week for game dev, then, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's been chaotic.
It always seems to be. And for our topic this week, we're going to hopefully try and de-chaotic some of the aspects of game development. As we're going to be discussing what it means to research a game genre for the first time. Whether you are an established vet or a newcomer, student, enthusiast, understanding kind of the basic elements of game design, I feel is becoming more and more important for developers who want to succeed and more importantly try and, survive on their video games and game development.
And we've definitely seen people not research their genres, and that's resulted in very poor games.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they may be aesthetically pleasing, they may be a lot of things, but what they're not is the main gameplay loop, and everything just feels hollow. It just, it doesn't ring true, and it feels like a lot of first timer mistakes often with the genre kind of thing because they did not do enough research into it. Because what you see on the surface level is not enough to, do it.
Mm-hmm.
You could see the surface level easily by just playing a game or two. And but to really get down to the nitty gritty to really do your research, you really need to play a lot of games, watch a lot of other games, and do other kinds of research, whatever research you can,
Mm-hmm.
and really dive in deep to it.
Yeah, and I have a post that's going to be going up this week, coming up by the time for those of you watching this live. It should be up by the time this goes up in recorded form about why studying the science side of game design, or just the field of game design, is very important. Because, like you said, we've seen games come from people who are either, 100% programmer focus or 100% art focus. And what ends up happening is that these games often turn out terrible for different reasons. And part of that is just not understanding what is the moment to moment gameplay of the genre looks like.
Right. So when I make a game, I'm 100% design focused, 100% writing focused, 100%
Mm-hmm.
art focused, 100% programming focused. I'm all the percent of everything.
So you're like 800%?
Yeah, 900%,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even 10,000%.
Mm-hmm. And for a lot of people, like going back to what Shark just said about playing genres, playing lots of examples of a genre, this is one of the things that every time this conversation comes up on Twitter, I can feel that little migraine in my head starting to form. And that's the argument over, do you need to play games in order to design games? And you'll have people who will say, no, you don't need to play the genre in order to make it. Just do whatever you want. And, that is more than enough. 1,000 pay to win, exactly. And it just, every time I hear this, that and the just make video games as the ticket to success, it just gives me that aneurysm in my head when I start to hear that over and over again.
Yeah, and that's the just make video games is an old wine that has no relevancy in today's world
Mm-hmm.
other than history class. I mean, like it has as much relevancy.
Ooh,
Wow, your camera's gone nuts.
yeah, that was weird. There we go. Hmm. I guess just like rubbing my head caused the whole field to get distorted.
It's still really grainy right now,
Hmm.
but it's better than it was before.
Yeah, that was weird. Hmm.
But that's an old thing that only matters for like game development history. Let's talk about, the 90s. Let's talk about the 80s. Let's talk about the 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about how game dev has evolved. That's the only part where that's relevant,
Mm-hmm.
to do anything about making a game today, it's not relevant.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you invent a time machine, then
Mm-hmm.
it might be relevant. You invent the time machine, you know when to go back in time to when just make a game matters, and then hop in that time machine, you go back to that time, and then you just make a game. Then
And you're
you're
good.
golden,
Mm-hmm.
But without the time machine, no.
Or you just go, you invent the time machine, you make the video game, then you go back to just before you announce the game and you release it then, so that way you don't have to spend all the money and time making the game, thereby having 100% profit. But
There is one thing actually I will take back. There is one place where just making a game is relevant,
mm-hmm.
and that is when you're getting started and you don't know how to get started. Just make something. Just get into
Mm-hmm.
it. We're not talking about we're not talking about making a top tier game. We're talking about learning how. We're
Yeah.
talking about when we're talking about just make a game. We're talking about just make a game to learn with,
Yeah,
kind of
and
thing.
we're not even at the point of talking about putting your game on Steam. I mean, we could even argue not even putting your game on itch. That what we're saying, and this is when I think when I talk to a lot of developers, like this is what they'll agree on. One second. That just going through the entire steps from pre-production to game release is an essential set of skills that you need to pick up. It's that old, learn to walk before you can run, or in this case, learn to crawl before you can walk. If you can't even release a simple game, there is no way in hell you're going to be releasing your magnum opus, my game that's going to take 10 years of development. It's going to earn me $20 million.
Yep. And it's you need to get started. And yes, when you're getting started, just make a game, but don't release it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is.
Definitely get feedback on it
Mm-hmm.
and whatnot, but don't release it. And I would say one of the best ways to get started / worst ways is best worst at the same time is through a game jam.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I got my start, where I started programming my first game, where I started putting an actual made a reality of something. I had made many game design documents and stuff many years before that, but never went anywhere with it. But
Mm-hmm.
that was the first thing that you could physically interact with, and it did me good, kind of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
the thing is a secret to all game jams, and most people royally mess up on it. I would say 99% people mess up on it. Get sleep. Do not crunch. Get sleep. Be more productive, because it's better to be running at 100% for 16 hours a day for 3 days than it is to be running at 100% for the first 16 hours, 30% for the next or 100% for the first 16 hours, 30% for the next 8 hours, 20% for the next 24 hours, and 10% or 5% for the last 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sleep is underrated, exactly. And, yep, these are, again, like, Game Jam is a little bit, off topic for today, but it's how you get started in game dev and in game design that is very important for developers. And like we said a few minutes ago, it's often where not only, like, first-timers tend to fail, but even professional people in the industry. Like those that go from a AAA company to into the indie space. And their first idea is basically, hey, this game that I just, this franchise that costs like several $1 million to make and hundreds of people, I bet I can do that on my own in a year, right?
Oh yeah, that's easy. If they took a few hundred people and it took them 3 years, you can easily do it by yourself in a year. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you're as talented as those 300 people times three.
Mm-hmm. And don't
I mean,
forget, it's going to look just like the AAA game as well.
oh yeah, you are 900. You are like a 900 person man team, all in
Mm-hmm.
your own, and you're just that OP. You have gone ultra instinct, and you can just do
Mm-hmm.
that easily.
Yep. And what we usually see happening is that they're going to release a game, and it is either A, just completely horrible version of the game that they worked on, such as something like Mighty Number 9, which I still need to play that game. I got a free key for it, so I'm going to have to enjoy the masochism one of these days. Or B, it's just this, like, convoluted mess of, we're not going to, redefine the wheel. We're going to break it, and then we're going to, weld it back together in a new artistic form that it's a square hexagon cylinder wheel that doesn't work at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like getting back on topic, studying your genre is so important because
Mm-hmm.
no matter how much time you spend on the game, if you don't examine your genre properly, it's not going to matter. None of that time's going to matter because
Mm-hmm.
the mistakes because of that is going to ruin everything. It's like what would be a good analogy here?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's like if you had no training and everything, and then you decided to go, I'm just going to go bull riding, and
Mm-hmm.
you get on that bull, and the train wreck that occurs afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
Oh yes. And
you may end up being dead after it.
yeah. And this is like going back to what we were saying a few minutes ago about when you play a video game. When we talk about this, classing with electro death metal, that this isn't about mastering a game. We're not saying, oh, you need to be top 100 Street Fighter player in order to make a fighting game, or you
Oh
need
no.
to 100% every Mario game if you want to make a platform. What we're saying and why this is very difficult is that the idea of game design study is still really not understood by a lot of people. And I would argue not even by a lot of people who either teach or develop games. And part of this is that there's never really been a precedent for this. A lot of game design really just came about with people putting things together and seeing what worked. Hey, what about a game where you just build stuff and not have to worry about combat? What about a game where you build stuff and you fight at the same time and you do random dancing after you kill people?
A Fortnite dance.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I want to put on what you said is, um, you said you don't have to be the best at a genre. You don't even have to be good at the genre,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to be not poor at it because you have to be able to play enough of it, get through enough of it, so that you can get the full feel of the game. Of the genre and everything, and
Mm-hmm.
you need to do that on multiple games. You need to be I would say that the lowest you could be is below average. I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't say that you would have to be average, but if you could be below average, I think that would be good enough. You could
Mm-hmm.
get through enough of the game to get a full feel of it and play enough of them and really research it.
Yeah. And to Pony's comment about you don't need to do Mario conventions if your players end up being ones who never play Mario, that is another important point about market research and genre research. is that you need to be able to understand, and these are the 3 points I'm going to be talking about in a post. You understand what works in a genre, what doesn't work in a genre, why do people play this genre? Those are the three key aspects. If you can't answer those questions, then you need to keep playing that genre, keep playing examples of it. And to build off what Shark just said, again, like, you don't need to be a grandmaster. And there are plenty of people who have designed games in genres that either they aren't huge fans in, or maybe they're not the best at it. But if you understand game design, if you can analyze and break down a game, you can do a lot with less. And again, I'm going to toot my own horn here, but this is why I say that when I play a game, like 20 to 30 minutes of me playing a game probably has more analytical value than a general consumer spending like 5 to 10 hours on that same game. Because I'm somebody who understands this. Like, I eat, sleep, drink, breathe design. So
Yeah.
I can put this stuff together very easily. And this sounds again like, I'm just, inventing things, or it's all magic, BioWare magic. But when we say, or when we find stuff that doesn't work in a game genre or in a game, this is not stuff that takes hours on end of research. Many times, and I'm sure you can agree with this as well, Shar, that when we spot a problem with a game, it's probably within the first 5 to 10 minutes of playing that game if you know what you're looking for.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like within the first 5 minutes, if there's a lot of red flags in the game, you will probably see them in the first 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You will probably see a lot of them in the first 5 minutes.
Oh.
And I think Rogue Game / Jerome has a good point there about you have to understand the ingredients or game mechanics to give people what they expect. And yeah, you need to go in to the genre and find out the mechanics / ingredients of each game and why they work well together. Because like each game is going to use in the same genre is going to use different ingredients, but some of the ingredients will be the same. And but there's probably not too many ingredients that go all the way across it. Maybe salt.
Mm-hmm.
But you pretty much put salt on everything, but you don't put chicken on everything. You don't put meat on everything. You don't put mustard on everything. All that kind of stuff varies, kind of thing. But you put salt generally on most things. But you go through and you examine why they work together and whatnot. And it's very much like cooking. You got to find stuff that meshes well together with each other. And you got to learn the aspects of each one and find out why they work the way they work well together before you can deconstruct all of it and formulate a new recipe of the whole thing together. And your own new recipe, your new game of that genre kind of thing. And then you could throw in other stuff from other games, other mechanics that fit well with what your dish is. Because like let's say that, you're making a pizza kind of thing. And you got pepperoni and onions and whatnot, and you're like, this is really good. This is what normal pizzas have. But there's a complexity that you could add to this if you added something sweet to it to offset the savory of the cheese and the all this other stuff, and you add pineapple to it. And I know a lot of people are going to be for that, but that adds flavor complexity to it. Therefore, you have a wider spectrum of all the different aspects, and you now have something very, very different and very, very good, most likely, if everything meshes well together.
And going back to what I said a minute ago about why you don't need to be a grandmaster of a genre, This is also part of the reason why being that super high level player may not exactly help you when it comes to game design. Because a lot of people who internalize issues or pain points in UI UX, they don't understand the issues of a genre. Because every genre has pain points built into it. Whether it's, a hard to follow UI in, a simulation style game, technical challenges of a platformer, difficulty of a roguelike, all these aspects. And if you are, super high level, I 100% this game, it's easy for me, the get good crowd, you may not realize that these are issues. So then you release your super hardcore, masochistic, top 0.075% of the player base can even play a game, and lo and behold, people aren't buying this game. You may get like
Hmm.
30 sales, and that's all your hardcore friends who are saying, oh yeah, just make it harder, don't care what anyone else says.
Yeah, and that's falling deep down the rabbit hole that you should not be going down.
Mm-hmm.
You should be definitely be getting feedback from everybody who is not, and you should be getting it from newbie players. Should getting it from veterans. You should be getting it from from average people. You should be
Mm-hmm.
getting it from people who don't like the genres. You should be getting people who don't like anything remotely close to the genre. But you should be getting feedback from a wide spectrum of people. And your
Mm-hmm.
goal is to make everybody like it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's pretty easy to get a hardcore player to like it.
Just make it difficult.
It even without being difficult, it's
Mm-hmm.
easy to get a hardcore player to do it because it just has to have optional stuff that is challenging.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And I want to go to what Pony just said about people trouble understanding that their skill level isn't the default or average skill level. Because this is I think, a really good comparison point to why you need to study genres. Because another thing that we see from a lot of first time or inexperienced game developers is a complete lack of onboarding or understanding what does it mean to play this genre for the first time. How many strategy games have we played that have horrible tutorials? How many action games have we played that have literally no tutorials, or even not even, button prompts to let somebody know what the jump button is? And
not many because we generally don't play those games.
unless you're a masochist like me, then you always play them.
Yeah.
And again, this is why you need to study genres, and particularly study what is working in them. And the example that I want to bring up is platformers. I've played a few platformers in my time. My second book was all about platforming. And you know what I did to play that, or to write that book? I played a lot of platformers. And here's the thing that I learned: pressing the jump button and making that work is a lot harder than I think a lot of people give credit for. And platforming is almost a universal genre. It's probably like the most developed genre in the industry, thanks to all the platformers released in the 80s and 90s. And hi, Amir.
Yeah,
And
I mean, like pressing the jump button is a good thing of where something so simple can be so complex, but a lot of developers see it as the most simple thing and leave it as the most simple thing and end up killing their game because of it.
yeah,
Because you don't want to just jump. You want to
mm-hmm,
have, in general, this isn't always, but you generally want to have variable height jumping to where
mm-hmm,
it depends on how long you hold it and how long you put into it. So you can just do a little small jump, or you can do a regular medium jump, or you can do a long jump and several places in between kind of thing.
yeah,
And you also want to, you can have a running jump that does a somersault. You can do a back jump kind of thing where you do a backflip. You can do all kinds of different things. And there's, you know,
Hmm.
Mario was able to pull out what about Mario 64 pulled out what probably about 10, 15, 20 jumps
Somewhere around.
out of just a single button
Yep.
in jumping. And sometimes the directional was involved, but it was all just one button there,
Hmm.
and maybe the directional,
Yeah.
depending on
And
what it is.
And that, again, is another really good point. I have played platformers where I hit the jump button and the character just has one jump height. That's it. And the feel of jumping is also very hard to do. Like, there are platformers that you'll press the jump button, the character, like, takes like half a second before they actually jump. Or that the jump just, it feels horrible to do that. And to Rogue Games or Jerome, like what he said about Cause of Mario, like so many people have tried to emulate Mario or emulate Sonic, and most often it ends up being worse than those games. And again, this is why you need to play these games. And hi, Rat's Tail, you are kind of late, but we were also late this week too.
Very,
But
very late.
you can have, again, I have played hundreds of platformers. I've had hundreds of different jump systems, and very few of those turned out either equal to Mario or different enough that it stands on its own. And you can't, and this is why you play genres, and why when people say just watch footage, it doesn't work. If you just watch a platformer, you are never going to know how that jump feels in somebody's hands. It's impossible. You're never going to be able to get that without playing it.
Yeah. And if you look at a good example, not necessarily a platformer, but one of our go-tos, other Sharks game, Vision Soft Reset.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at that game, the way he designed it was he designed it with all the jumping mechanics and everything from the very beginning, and just you had an empty room that he was running around in and just playing with the jump and just playing with the jump in a open room with some basic walls in it. No level design, no gameplay, just black and white, with a box kind of thing. It felt really, really good and fun, and that is key. And that applies to other genres as well. The mechanics alone should be able to stand on their own, even
Mm-hmm.
if it doesn't matter what genre it is. Even if it's a tactical RPG, you should be able to move your units, position them. The strategy should work. And, of course, you need a little bit more level design in that, but you get the point. Like, it should work in any genre. You should be able to feel the goodness of the game without anything but the basics there.
Mm-hmm. And to get to that point, you need to understand what makes that genre work. To go back to what Baka Bryan said a minute ago about games should always silently teach the player. Like, that kind of organic tutorial design, that is incredibly high level game design. It's something that Nintendo makes it look very easy. We always go back to World 1-1 of Super Mario Brothers, but it is a lot harder in practice to build a game like that. And why a lot of indie developers tend to mess up. Because, like, going back to what Pony said, it's that difference between we're going to passively guide the player versus I'm not going to tell you a damn thing, just figure it out on your own. And I played a game lately, or we played this game during the summer festival. It was like a Dark Souls like 2D action adventure game. And I got stuck in a section, not because I wasn't good enough, but because the game had a mechanic that it never referenced on a button that you would never press by itself, and the game expected you to know this without having any tutorial prompts to explain it.
Yeah. And there's an equivalent of the single jump in RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that's called RPG Maker, where it's just, you have a simple attack and it'll target whatever enemy you select, and that's it. It is just a simple basics of the basics kind of thing. It's not like fully fleshed out. It's not like a full RPG system, kind of thing where you would have elemental damage. You would have, it's like rock, paper, scissors, but exploded into like, a whole span of things where it's elements now, and you have ice, fire, wind, water, ice, summon Captain Planet, all that kind of stuff. You have all of that, and there's so much detail to it and granularity. And then you have enemies that, are immune to fire, resistant to fire, just take a little bit less damage from it. You have ones that are weak, ones that are strong, weak, super weak, ones that are critical, ones that will instantly die when they get hit by it, because it's like salt on a slug kind of thing. But like, there's all kinds of different granularity in there. But when you look at like most RPG Maker games, they're just straight off the plain basic stuff, and that's the reason why RPG Maker games have such a bad reputation, which has now impacted RPGs as a whole. Speaking of RPG Maker, since everyone wants to call them JRPG, shouldn't it be JRPG Maker?
Maybe.
No, it shouldn't, because JRPG is a lie. That's not a real word. Not a real genre.
Yep, and to Ratsail's point or comment about codifying invisible tutorials, they were kind of the first. Like again, like Super Mario Brothers was one of like the early console releases, and I can't think of any other games around that time that would have done something along those lines. And to Jerome's comment about sort of making tutorial, yeah, tutorial design is very difficult. It is one onboarding UI UX. They are very, very hard to do right, and why you need to study these genres inside and out, because you need to know. Oh.
I know that with my last playtest yesterday with Neon Continuum that we did during our dev chat, with that, I had several people, I had a couple of people tell me that I need a tutorial in my game. And I'm like, it's way too early for the tutorial. The tutorial's got to be at the very end. And it's like, well, I don't know what I'm doing kind of thing. I was like, okay, I am going to add a makeshift tutorial. Just something, display a card, draw lines to it. And this is this, this is this, this does this does this. And just put the basics on there. It's basically a diagram of what each aspect of the card does. And just leave it at that, just as a temporary screen that they can, pull up for information on it. And it'll be a really crappy tutorial, but it's not going to stay in the game. It's just going to be, it's just there for the people who are playing it in its most broken, buggy form, kind of thing.
And that's another pro tip. Your first tutorial should not be what goes into the finished game. Because we've seen developers who do that they'll make a very bare bones tutorial, year one of development, and they'll keep that there for year, 5, when the game is completely different, and then they wonder why people aren't figuring this game out.
Ideally, you don't make a tutorial at all at the beginning. But, in my case, I'm going to have to, kind of thing. In the case of Besiege, they had to. But they didn't go back and make a new one,
I was just about to bring that one up, too. Yep, and it is very difficult to put all this stuff together. And I want to go back to something to your chef analogy, or your cooking analogy from earlier.
That was the rooms.
Oh, but then you kind of like ran with it, with, the recipes and stuff. That there's this idea that another aspect we see from developers, especially first-timers, is the crazy combinations. What if we combine a city builder with a dating sim? What if we make a first-person shooter, cooking, visual novel, open-world roguelike? Or what if we make a platformer when you don't jump? Maybe a platform when you just hop and skip, or you do tumbling around.
Well, we have almost a version of that exact thing with the web game.
Mm-hmm.
There's technically a jump in there, but you don't really need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Duke Nukem Forever. And what we see from developers who go this route is that when you start mixing genres, if you don't understand the underlying foundation of each genre, you're just going to end up with a mess that is not going to appeal to everybody. And there's a phrase that we've used, I think, on many of these talks that you need to understand the rules before you can actually break them. And
Hmm.
there is a huge difference between somebody who has never made a platformer before trying to make one that's outside the box versus somebody who is a 100%, they are a, Shigeru Miyamoto level of a platformer designer, and they're going to build something completely non-platformer like for their game.
Hmm. Yeah, you have to. If you try to break a genre before you truly know it,
Mm-hmm.
it's gonna yield a bad result. You need to be fully aware of it. And something I just noticed, we're at 49 subscribers. One more subscriber to 50.
Nice. And you have to be able to, again, when you're examining a genre, you have, like, I already talked about what you don't want to do, but what do you want when you're looking at a genre? Like, what are some things that you should be actively keeping notes on? So, you should be paying attention to anything that is giving you some semblance of joy, giving you that dopamine rush. You know, is it the act of jumping? Is it when I slice an enemy, shiny loot pops out? Is it the you leveled up, you now do 8 points of damage? You want to be able to examine a game and understand. Yeah, we went on a lot of tangents here, but you want to be able to understand why this genre works. So I know for you, Shark, that you want to talk, or like the examples you want to bring up more on the RPG side. So when you play an RPG, what works for you? Like, what are the elements that you want to bring out in that genre?
Well, I think the most key element is the strategy and tacticalness of it. You need to, because it's turn based for a reason. It's turn based. When you're speaking about turn based anyway, there are the action variants, but when you're speaking about turn based kind of thing, the reason why they are turn based to begin with is because there's so much depth and so much strategy in there. Do I want to use this fireball against this person? If I do that, then it might heal him. So I need to be careful about that. And do I want to target this limb or this limb kind of thing? Do I want to use a spell that targets everybody? Do I want to use my special that takes a long time to charge up? Do I want to expend my mana? And it's this, calculations on what would be the best move kind of thing. I mean, you run this same thing in a card game kind of thing. Hence why card games and RPGs kind of go hand in hand for a lot of part because they're both turn based, they're both very strategy heavy, and in general, if you got a good one, and they're like just it's a thinking person's game. It's about
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it. Now, some games go a little bit too off of that to where you just go around and you just do basic hits and
Mm-hmm.
when it becomes just too much of a you just go around and do basic hits kind of thing unless you're just power leveling or something grinding up
Mm-hmm.
which you need to limit that unless you build a game exact designed around that like Disgaea. But like unless you don't want to do too much just basic hits kind of thing, and you want to have a good variety as well as a good strategy in there. Like my last game, the strategies were is certain attacks had more range, certain attacks
Mm-hmm.
had more possible enemies they could hit, certain attacks had more damage, and the way I did it was we had 5 attacks for every character. We had the basic attack, which only attacked the one square in front of you, but in the end was the second, or yeah, I think it was the second most powerful attack in the game if you leveled it up fully.
Mm-hmm.
If you got it all the way up to level 5. Although I noticed when people played, they didn't level up that high. They only got to level 1 or 2. Then I had another attack that was your first, area attack, and it was just somewhere really close to you, about 6 to 9 blocks kind of thing that were just right there at you, and it did more starting damage than the basic attack, but in the end it was one of the weaker attacks. And then you had like the next attack that was I focused on range. This was your ranged attack. This was your paper tornado. This was your I forget what the rock one was where he shoots off with fireball, but it's your ranged attack that has more distance in it and everything, and a decent bit of area. But paper tornado was the exception to that one, because like the others were like really, really powerful, but because they had a shorter range, but they had and a smaller area kind of thing, so they hit less blocks. But the paper tornado hit a lot of blocks and had a long range, but it was the weakest attack in the entire game by far. It was like I think it was like the second weakest attack. I think was like 2 or 3 times more damage than the paper tornado did.
Yep.
But then we had like a high, big range, big area, big damage attacks, and we had all this variety that by the end of it, you were, in theory, using all the attacks, and none of them ever outdated the other one, because there was always a use case scenario for all of them. They all still had utility at the end of the game.
Yep. And you have to be able to understand, again, what are the underlying systems that make these games work. And to bring up Jerome's comment about best thing about flaws in a genre, change to try and fix them. This has, or for the longest time, was Blizzard's MO when it comes to their games. Classic Blizzard, not, current day Blizzard. That this idea of being able to examine a genre and figure out what works and what doesn't work, and reducing the amount of pain that goes into it. As we've said before, classic Blizzard, they were not really innovators. They didn't make unique or original games. What they did was take something and polish it to such a point that it essentially becomes its own standard for that genre. Whether it was MMOs, action RPGs, MOBAs, whatever.
And something I want to also say that Jerome said, but you only notice the potential flaws by actually playing the game. I would say that that's true to a certain point, but I think that you can also, if you're really good at researching, you can also notice those flaws when watching somebody else play. Like I watch Josh play all the time, and I'm like, yeah, that's a red flag. That's a red flag, and see these flaws in there, but I can't see, visual is only part of it, and there are some flaws that no matter no matter how much you look at it, you can't see it because it's not in the visuals that you can see. You could see that, if somebody tries to, make a jump and like the game cheats them out of it, you might be able to see that, but that's a very, very hard thing to see. But it's a very, very easy thing to feel. But there are other things that there, is like clunky controls, like the jump button being on start, and like any number of other things are easy to figure out by playing it, but impossible, if not insanely hard, to figure out if you're just watching. So watching is most beneficial when you are an expert at it. But when you're an expert at it, you realize that you also have to play a lot of them. So like you don't have to play every game. You don't have to research every game kind of thing. But you need to research a lot. And this, goes on the other side of the genres that we haven't talked about. And that's the genres, not gameplay genres, but theming genres. Whether your game's cyberpunk, fantasy, sci-fi,
horror,
whatever genre that falls into, because people think that genre is just one thing. No, genre is multiple things. There's gameplay genres and there's music genres. There's what would you call that? Media genres? What would horror and sci-fi?
I mean, kind of using thematic
genre.
Yeah,
thematic genres. Yeah. And you need to do your research in those. When I was making my current game, I was in early days. I was watching everything cyberpunk I could watch. Whether it's a movie, an anime, a TV series, whatever it was, I was consuming every bit of it that I could. And I was looking at anything cyberpunk. If it was a game, I would try to watch a playthrough or play it myself if I could get it, or I already had it. I would, same thing with time travel, and all these other aspects of the game. And I researched every one of those, as well as researching card games and CCGs in particular, with the, Magic the Gathering, Hearthstone, and like a bunch of other games that I cannot think of the name of. Like I researched a bunch of them, and it was research on both sides, and you really need to commit a lot of time to this.
Yeah, and Pony brought up a really good point that we didn't say that we also need to clarify. When you're researching games for a genre, you also want to play the not masterpiece examples of it. The bad ones, the okay ones, the average ones. Because this is another thing I think a lot of people do end up messing up on, going back to the Mario point from earlier. That Mario is essentially masterclass platforming design. It is, the cream of the crop of that genre. If you only play Mario games, you are not seeing all the work that goes into getting a game to that point. What I said earlier about things that don't work or the bad elements of a genre, if you want to spot those, you need to play other examples of it. Like if you're going to make a platformer, you need to learn what LJN did, and don't do that with your platformers. All the horrible movie tie-in platformers of the 80s and 90s. All the lesser indie examples of platformers. And the reason, and Pony's beating me to it, is that if you don't understand what can trip somebody up or what are examples when it doesn't work, most likely you're going to make those mistakes. It's another thing we see from people who try to copy FTL and Darkest Dungeon. That they just said, oh, we're just going to make a spaceship game, or we're just going to make a RPG dark Lovecraft game. And they try to emulate those games to the point where it feels like those games, but far worse, because they fell into all those traps that, Subset and Red Hook didn't fall into.
And to Baka Brian's question about at what point do we think research becomes unnecessary or redundant? That's a hard question because basically it depends. Ask a lawyer. But I would say when you research enough that there's nothing that new information wise that is coming to you, and you've researched a good bit, that's when it becomes, I think, unnecessary or redundant. But that is dependent on you actually absorbing the information properly to begin with. Because if you're not absorbing the information properly to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
then number one, you can research forever and not get anywhere. Number two is it'd be the same as not researching. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that you're absorbing the information properly, and then when you're absorbing it properly and everything, and you're getting this, you, you get to the point where you know
Mm-hmm.
that you've got enough,
Yeah.
or and I know when I was doing my research for on the specifically the cyberpunk side of things, I don't think I ever got enough, and I was I'm still to this day still researching them as we continue on, but like I I got enough to get the core and more than the core, so like I'm going forward while just slowly consuming stuff on the side in a slow manner, where before I was watching 16 hours worth of cyberpunk movies, TV shows, and all that stuff a day for like a month, couple of months, maybe even 3 months. It was a long time, and I was going down the list of everything considered cyberpunk from A to Z, and every movie, anime, and everything. It was a database of all these things that existed, and I was all the way up to I think the letter like H of everything cyberpunk.
Yeah.
And had I got down to M, Matrix would have been in there.
Mm-hmm. And another reason why, like, to add on to that, like, I do agree with you that there comes a point where you're just, repeating the same things. But I would also argue that if you're working in a genre and a new game in that genre is released or is coming out at the same time you're developing it, you should keep an eye on that. Because part of understanding design is that you need to understand what are the trends of that genre. You need to, again, understand the foundational elements, and you need to understand what people expect out of it today. Because
Oh yeah,
we've seen.
I've been absolutely keeping an eye on Cyberpunk 2077 ever since I heard about it, and I was so fretting its release.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, that might kill us, kind of thing.
And
And then it was released, and it was a complete train wreck. And I was like, oh, okay, not really
and
anything to worry about.
and of course, anytime I play a deck builder or any kind of deck building style game, you also take notes of that in terms of what other people are doing. Because if somebody does something in your genre and they do it better than you, that is a new standard that you have to keep track of. Like I've
Mm,
said, another thing I've seen a lot of first timers mess up with is that they make a platformer or a roguelike or an RPG or whatever, and it's worse than the games they're trying to emulate. They'll say, "Oh, I'm just making a Mario platformer," and it plays worse than Super Mario Bros. 1. Or, "I'm going to make a beat 'em up," and Streets of Rage 1 and 2 from the Genesis era beats this game. And you have to be aware of, like we've said throughout this discussion, that there are foundational elements to a core gameplay loop of a genre. And again, that is genre dependent. Like, I can't just tell you, these are the 10 things that must be in every video game ever made, or it's not a game. But I.
well, I can
Mhm.
volume sliders, controller support, uh, graphics, programming, music, UI, UX.
Yeah.
Uh,
But from a design layer, again, what works in a platformer may not work in a first person shooter, which may not work in a puzzle game, that may not work in a strategy game, which may not work in a roguelike. And this is, again, doubly so when you start mixing genres. That part of the reason why Hades turned out so well, being an action game that's also a roguelike, which is also, very story driven, is that Supergiant Games understood story, action games, roguelike design. And if you don't understand these individual pieces, there's no way in hell you're going to be able to combine them. And yeah, to Pony's point, yeah, I love really good menus and UI UX. But I don't talk about that at all here, right, Shark?
No, never, 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 not even once. But the thing is when you're making your first commercial game, it needs to be a single genre. Do not make a multiple genre game because you will fail unless you get lucky.
Yeah.
Unless you get struck by lightning 3 times, win the lottery, and then get struck by lightning 3 more times, and make it home alive within 10 minutes span.
Yeah.
Unless you do that, your game is going to fail.
And
the thing is you need to make sure that you stick to that single genre and do something really good and unique about it. You got to stick to the genre, but you got to be unique. Mm-hmm. Single genre, unique, and if you can nail that, then you have a chance, and then you can move on from that point. And I would probably do a single genre for your first 3 commercial games.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is again why we say you don't want your first game, or even probably your 5th or 6th game, to be your dream game. You know, mm-hmm. that game that keeps you up at night with so many combinations of genres and designs that nobody's ever thought of it, and it will be the most amazing game.
Yeah, I have that on my back burner.
Yeah,
that is so far on the back burner. Mm. I will be lucky if 10 years from now I'll be able to make that game. I'd be extremely lucky at that point. I think I'd be lucky if 20 years from now I'll be able to make that game. Yeah. But that is my goal. That is my goal, to make that game. But it's way in the back burner right now.
And to Pony's comments about like good menuing and Doom Eternal, again, this is why you study genres, because UI UX does not exist in a vacuum. None of what we've talked about exists in a single vacuum. And one of the surefire traps that developers fall into is just disregarding everything that's happening around them. Because as you're working on a game, I'm sure there are other people working on games at the same time. And when you play these different games, both good and bad, and you start to see elements that annoy you or elements that work, you can apply those to your game. You mentioned Vision Software said earlier. One of the examples that I really liked from that game was that simple act that you could shoot down as you're jumping, and it became like a pseudo double jump. And I remember when I asked him about on the interview, I said, "Was that done intentionally, or was that just like just like a side effect of your design?" And he said, "No, I did that intentionally." And he did that because it was something that worked while he was prototyping. It was cool, it was something he liked, and he put that in the game. And you get these elements when you start to understand how things work and how they don't work. Another example Pony brought up was Shovel Knight earlier. And Yacht Club Games, they are all alumni from... I always forget the name of the studio. The one who did that Genie game. Someone's going to type in chat by the time I look it up, too.
While you're doing that, I want to make one other point on what I was said earlier. That dream game of mine, it's under the label of Project Nexus, and I named my company after it because the goal of the company is to make that game eventually.
Mm-hmm. Here it is, Way Forward. And again, like we've said, to get to that point to make something, as highly polished and as refined as Shovel Knight, they had to have played and probably designed quite a few platformers in their time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, a lot of people misconstrue or they don't quite get the amount of work it takes to make a good video game. To make, a Plants vs. Zombies, or an XCOM, or a Disgaea, or a Darkest Dungeon. These games will oftentimes go through multiple revisions and iterations to get that design right. And it takes somebody who understands at the fundamental level what is good gameplay, what is good game design. And if you don't have somebody on your team who does that, most often your game is going to fail. It could be a well-programmed, bug-free game, but it could be horrible to play, or it could be this artistically moving game that is just uh, cumbersome and janky, and nobody's going to want to deal with that to get to your emotionally driven story.
Yeah, and to Rat's point about what is your perfect game, the one that you'll never make, because perfect game is never done.
Yeah, we did play it on stream. I'm waiting for it to go on sale to like kind of pick it up and go through Ghosts and Goblins proper when that happens. Yeah, and like Will Wright has certainly like he started out making those like top-down strategy games, and the story is that SimCity was inspired because he had more fun building the cities than blowing them up, and that's how SimCity started.
Mm. Yeah, so we're running into time. Do we have anything else we need to address in this? Anything we missed?
We talked about what works. We talked about what doesn't work. Let's see. Do we talk about why people play this genre? Well, I think this will be my final point then, because this would segue into marketing, which again is beyond the scope, but it is still something important to consider.
And ties into our other podcast.
Yeah. That one, besides looking at what works and what doesn't work in a genre, you also need to understand what are the bullet points or the marketing points of it. Because like going back to your example with Cyberpunk, that if you want to make a Cyberpunk game, but you've never watched, read, or consumed anything Cyberpunk, how do you know what fans of Cyberpunk want? It's the same with platformers, with Souls-likes, roguelites, visual novel, first-person shooters, anything along those lines. That if you aren't understanding why somebody plays this game, how are you going to appeal to them? Going back to what we're about horror as a thematic genre. If I'm going to make a horror game, when I'm researching, while I'm looking at it, I am expecting to see, very atmospheric scenes. If I'm building, a spoofy game where it's supposed to be, very cute and, stuff like that, like a spooky jump scare mansion, I need to understand what makes people appeal to that. Because if you don't figure these things out, you could end up with a platformer that, let's say, doesn't appeal. Let's say it's a platformer that all the jumping is off and all the level design is, let's say, it's neon red and neon yellow backgrounds that cause eye strain. But, I didn't do any research. I just made what I wanted out of a platformer.
Yeah. And I want to bring up something on researching the genres itself.
Mm-hmm.
Is most genres out there are well established, but there are some that are not. You can look at platformers and they're well established. You can look at a lot of genres; they're well established. You can look at horror; horror's well established, kind of thing. But I tell you, what I encountered when I researched Cyberpunk is not established at all.
Mm-hmm.
There is no continuous thread through all Cyberpunk media. There are some with no neons, like the Matrix kind of thing. There are some with no dystopia. There are some with no I'm brain party. There are many things that are common between a lot of them, but there is no one thing that runs continuous through it. Where like you can find that, and you can find a bunch of things that run, completely through every horror, a lot of things, kind of thing. You can find straight lines that go through all of them, kind of thing.
It depends.
99.9% of them, but you can't find that in Cyberpunk. The closest thing to a straight line through Cyberpunk I found was like maybe like 50%. 60%, something like that. It was definitely like segmented, and like each segmented was like, like where like most genres that are established are like basically a straight line with a few exceptions, outliers kind of thing. Where cyberpunk was, more like a series of short lines that were connected to each other, forming like a hexagon or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite weird when I was doing my research into it. So like, be careful with that if it's not an established genre, because I was learning about it and I was like, wow, this genre is not established. Well, what happens if my game happens to be the thing that establishes it, kind of
Yeah.
thing? What if it blows up to the point where it is the establishing point?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then I need to make sure that I am as true to what I think the core of cyberpunk is. So it took me way more research to I think try to get to that point, because I'm not just researching a genre at that point. I'm potentially defining it, and that takes a lot of care, effort to try to do right. And I've done the best I can. I probably could have done better, but we'll see when it finishes.
Yep. And there, like we've said, there are foundational elements. There are things people expect out of a genre. And like we said earlier, if you want to go against the grain, if let's say you want to make a deck builder that is not about booster packs, or is not about mana, or some completely different, alien strange kind of concept,
You mean Slay the Spire?
yeah, then you better damn well do your research and figure out how to make all that work. Kind of, it'll be almost like building a four-legged table and then figuring out, okay, how do we turn this into a three-legged table? But not starting at that three-legged table.
Mm-hmm. So you're just taking one of the legs off.
And still making it work somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe 3.5 leg table.
Well, what you do is you take the third leg on the side, and you take one of the legs that are close to the post, and you put a bar across the bottom that runs on the floor, so that leg makes an L and it supports the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could take two legs out of it, and then what you do is you turn both of the legs that you have left into U, so it connects on both sides.
And as Shark said earlier, the reason why this kind of leads into all of our other talks is that we do our Thursday show, the Indie Inquiry Show, where we review the store page marketing for a game. And why these things kind of fit together is that you need to understand what attracts people to play a game of the genre, because you're going to then have to market that game to those specific genre fans. If you're trying to market a horror game to horror fans, and your trailer looks like a, I don't know, like a 90s sitcom, or what was that?
My Little Pony commercial?
Yeah. It's probably not going to go well. Now, if you're trying to appeal to, My Little Pony fans, then, go for it. But, again...
Could you imagine a My Little Pony horror game?
I'm sure somebody has come up with that one itch by now, right?
Probably.
Mm-hmm. But if you can't figure out what makes these trends work, you're never going to be able to get your game in front of people. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people these days will describe their game as roguelike, or roguelike adjacent, or a roguelite, or like a rogue. Because they can understand that that's popular, that people can put, two and two together. That if I say my game is a roguelike, I'm expecting this, this, and this. Just if I say my game is a racing game, or a first-person shooter, or a visual novel, or whatever. And the only way you're going to be able to spot these things, again, is you gotta do research.
Mm-hmm. Which, Buck O'Brien, you should definitely check out our Indie Inquiry shows on
And we
Thursdays.
also do submission, and we're also accepting submissions for games as well.
Yeah, so when you get your store page up, or if you already have a past one up, submit it to us, and we'll go over it, kind of thing.
And Don't forget as well, Baka, if your thumbnail looks horrible, or if you don't have the right tags, or your title is off, as we say, you just put random numbers and punctuation points in your title, and Steam loves that, right?
Oh yeah,
Exactly, Pony.
I love how you phrase that. Call him Pop.
But I think we've reached, the end. Again, this is one of those topics that we can certainly expand on with any one of the concepts we've discussed. And if you guys want to see that in a future show or have suggestions, let us know in the comments and again on our respective discords.
Yeah, and just let us know a topic that you want us to cover, and we'll see if we can get to it.
hmm And like I said a minute ago, if you are working on an upcoming game or a game that is out that you'd like us to review for our Thursday show, just get in touch with either one of us and we will put it on the docket.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's all that I really have to say, at least for right now. I'm going to have a video up probably around the time this goes up in recorded form, more on this topic. But this is something that I genuinely believe in, that there definitely needs to be formal studies on game design. Because it's not this mysterious thing anymore. Again, like between the two of us, we can spot kind of successes and failures very quickly when we play games.
Mm-hmm. We very much, you once you start down that examining path, you get to a certain point, and once you get to that certain point, there ain't no turning it off. You've hit critical mass, and no matter how much you want to enjoy a game, your mind is just going to be like, here's a design aspect, here's a design aspect, here's a design aspect, and you can't turn it off, and you will just be sitting there
Never
permanently in
does.
that mode for the rest of your life. But it is good. If you're playing a competitive game, it makes it really easy to min max.
Oh, yes. Or any kind of strategy or management game like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and it is one of those things that if you don't do it, it sounds incredibly hard to do. Like I've had people who ask me questions about, design topics, and I'll give them an answer within like a second, and they'll say, something like that would probably take me like an hour to come up with. But I think that is going to do it. So, for those of you who've been tuning in live or recorded, thank you so much for watching. And if you want to tune into these shows live, they are held Sundays around our normal time of 4 to 4:30 Eastern Standard ET.
Or you mean 3?
Oh, for these shows, not for the Thursday. Yeah,
And be sure to lick the smash button and smash the lick button, and follow both of our channels. We have 2 different YouTube channels. Join both of our Discords. Again, 2 different ones. And we both have 2 Twitters. All the links to all of that will be down below.
Mm-hmm. And as I always say, if you're interested in supporting, you'll find Patreon. You'll find links to all my design books as well. So, I think that is it. Did we miss anything for our end of the stream promotion?
Well, if you want to see Neon Continuum, the game I'm currently working on, join our Discord. And once a month, we hold a public play session in our dev chat, and that was yesterday. So there will be one on the first Saturday of next month, and you can come and play it and get your hands on it, and it should be fun.
Mm-hmm. All right, so with that said, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where examine the art and science of games. Until our next show, have a great rest of your day.
See ya.